let's get the show on the road.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Quang Nguyen. Quang Nguyen. The heck with it. Just call him Q. Okay, I know it's sometimes hard for us. When I first met Q, he was like, yeah, it's like the John Smith of Vietnam. So how does a knucklehead like me end up being very good friends with Q? And it's the Naval Academy ties. And that's how it happened. About 5 years ago, I was mowing the lawn in the front yard here in Cape Coral, got a phone call. I'm not going to answer this. Maybe I should take a break. And guy on the other end of the line is going, is this Mike Pedersen? I was like, yeah, this is an Arizona area code. Who the heck are you? He's like, this is Quang Nguyen. You don't know me, but I was trying to get some information about the Naval Academy for my daughter. And we have a mutual friend, General Spider Nyland, former assistant commandant of the Marine Corps. And I knew him from flying F-4 Phantoms out of Hawaii. But Q had met him through Spider Nyland's brother. And Spider Nyland was not a Naval Academy grad, but Q asked him for some guidance for his daughter that was a sophomore in high school at the time in Prescott, Arizona. And Spider Nyland was like, I don't really know about the Academy. I'm not an Academy grad. I'm just a 4-star general assistant commandant of the Marine Corps. So you need to call Mike Pedersen in Florida. So that's how I got the phone call from Q, and he was looking for guidance for his daughter Sarah, which you'll see some pictures here that Q will talk about in a minute. And she was wanting to apply for the STEM program, which is the year before the Summer Seminar at the Academy. So, make a long story short, I was not her blue and gold officer, but I was assisting her through the whole process of providing guidance. So, the glue that brought someone like a knucklehead like me with a guy with a great story, life story, like Q together was the Naval Academy ties. So, without further ado, Q, if you can come up here, I'm very honored to have you speak to this group, and he's got an amazing story. Q, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Thanks.
Good afternoon. It certainly is an honor for me to be here. My voice is a little raspy because of the cold I got a few days ago. But Mike said earlier, it's God's act to put the two of us together. Let me start a little bit about my background and how I got to be here. And first of all, with the Marine Corps birthday recently, and yesterday was Veterans Day, I just want you to know straight out that without your sacrifice, I wouldn't be here, standing here talking to you at all. So I thank you in so many ways, and we are extremely grateful as a group of refugees that came by an act of Congress. We were able to come in 1975. So, how many of you were in Vietnam between 62 and 65, or even up to 68? Okay, go ahead and raise your hands. Better yet, if you can stand up for a second. Would you please stand for a second, if you can? I'm still looking for my dad. You didn't think I get to be 6'1" by eating rice, did you? Anyway, so I was born in 1962 in a small town called Da Lat. And Da Lat is about 200 miles northeast of Saigon. And there you go. Just right below the 2nd Corps, just right where Agent Orange was started, being sprayed. So I drank that for about 12 and a half years. In any event, Da Lat is also, by the way, if you saw that picture of the cadet standing up there, you'll see that my brother was the guy in the front row, left-hand side, and he went to a military academy model after West Point. So he's always asking me, how come Sarah didn't apply for West Point? And I, basically say, go ask Sarah. And she simply said, you can't be a Marine at West Point. So that's her answer to her uncle. But we came from a very rich military family history. My father Well, let me start with my journey, and I'll bounce back and forth on the timeline so you can kind of see how everything sort of get tied up. But I was born in 1962 and pretty much lived through the entire war, from the escalation in 1965 all the way to the end of the war in 1975. And I left 6 days before the fall of Saigon. Some lucky reason, my dad took my brother and I to the Tân Sơn Nhất airport, dropped us off and said, hey, adios, we may or may not see each other again. So get on that C-130 and make the best of it. So I did, and even at that point I had no idea where I was going. So my journey took me to Subic Bay. We spent one night there, and then we flew to Guam for processing diseases, you name it, paperwork, background checks. So I was there for a whole week, and then went on to Travis Air Force Base, and down to Pendleton, 3 days at Travis, some more paperwork, some more blood work, whatever it was. And then we flew to Camp Pendleton for one night, and then on to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And even at this point, I had no idea what was going on. You just don't know. You know, you're 12 and a half years old, and you're bouncing all over the country, and it was somewhat intimidating. But to go back to the time I was in Vietnam, you know, a lot of veterans would come and ask, you know, how was it then? What was it like living in Vietnam? And I said, you know, if you didn't have peace and all you know is war, you simply don't know the difference. You wake up, there's a war going on, there are bullet holes outside of your classrooms, but that's just the norm. So did I have a bad time? Probably not. You know, we played, we tell jokes, and we do things as little kids, and do the soccer thing and whatever it is that we could do. Mom and dad are slightly different. They're a little bit different. They had different sort of concerns, and my oldest brother was 16 years older than me. I was an accident. So he, you know, obviously he was in the war from 68 to 75, and he was wounded 3 times with the Vietnamese airborne. So that's pretty much how I see life. I mean, it's just a normal kid growing up. Talk about my dad for a little bit. He was fighting the French since he was 16 years old. French came over, occupied our country for 180 years, or a little more or less. By the time he was 16 years old, he was fighting the French under the Viet Minh flag, which is the earlier version of Communist Ho Chi Minh. And then when the Japanese came during World War II, he was pretty much doing the same job, fighting Japanese. But if you know my dad, he's kind of a strange bird. He actually spoke multiple languages fluently. Kind of funny that his English wasn't very good, but he didn't intend to learn English. But he was fluent in French because he was fighting the French. He said the only way to get to know your enemy is to speak the same language. So when the Japanese came, guess what? He was fluent in Japanese, because he was doing the same job. So after World War II, when Japan left, he was sent back to doing the same thing with the French, all the way until Dien Bien Phu. He was not at Dien Bien Phu, but he was pretty much celebrating. But it was a short celebration, because then he realized that Ho Chi Minh was a communist, and he didn't want to be a part of communists. So he went south. He took my oldest brother and went south in 1954 during the year when the BMC was open. He went south, joined the ARVN, went to a military academy, graduated, commissioned as second lieutenant in 56 or something like that. And from that point on, he fought in the war to the very end of his career, which is 1973. So he retired as a lieutenant colonel. And you know, it was, you know, in the last few years of his career, he actually taught political science to the various military academies around Saigon and so on. So he was involved with that, and he was not a popular guy with the communists, because he wrote articles and books, and they're all anti-communist. So he was not a very popular guy. Near the end, before I left, we actually burned 4,000 books that he had written. Actually, one book, but we had 4,000 copies left. And we had a 15-gallon barrel in the backyard, and we were burning our books, because because we wouldn't want them to get in and find that, you know, Dad taught political science. Dad is anti-communist. He wrote a book called What is Communism? And the reason he wrote that, because he spent so many years under Ho Chi Minh fighting with the Viet Minh. So he wrote a book about how horrible life was. And you know, I talk to my mom all the time. I mean, life was just horrible under communism when she was actually born in Hai Phong. And if you're a Navy pilot, you flying in Vietnam, you know exactly where Hai Phong was. And my dad was born in Hanoi. So we're, you know, genetically, we all came from the north. We speak the northern dialect and so on. So that's pretty much it. And Dad was pretty much a role model for the rest of us. And my brother in 1966 went to that military academy up there, graduated, went to an airborne unit and served with 3 injuries all the way to the end of 1975. And then I had another brother who became an Army medic as well. So, and he came in late in the war. He turned 18 in 1973. So his war story is short, you know, just 2 years before the fall of Saigon. So basically, kind of an overall, when things got a little bit heated and I'm bouncing back and forth again, right about spring of 1975, my dad knew that the country wasn't going to be able to stand, especially 1973, the Americans pulled out, and then shortly after that, the 93rd Congress cut all funding to Vietnam and Cambodia. So he knew that it wasn't going to be good. He was actually one of those officers in the earlier days that actually went around the country trying to sell the Paris Peace Accord. But in doing so, it was his job to go to the various generals and said, you know, this is a peace accord, this is what it's all about. But before he died, he told me that it was so fraudulent that he felt guilty. But he did say the president and the vice president, the Vietnamese vice president and the president had blood on their hands. And he said that just, you know, a year before he passed away. So we can kind of understand what's going through. And as much as you want to take politics out of these, out of the Vietnam War, you can't help because politics involved in the Vietnam War. And that sort of made me who I am today. And so, yeah, but the funny thing about politics is, to me, in this day and age, it doesn't really matter which side of the fence you're on. If you're a Vietnam War veteran, I just want you to know that you can go home, look in the mirror, and be proud of your service and say, you know what? I'm proud of that family in Arizona. They're living and doing well because of my service. Whether you're, you're on this side of the Paris Accord or the other side or whatever it is that you do, you can actually, and I thank you the same. I thank you the same for being there for us. It has nothing to do with politics at that point. I often go to high schools and colleges and things like that, and I'm not really well liked because I have a tendency to give a speech and talk about the real Vietnam War, and apparently it's not the same as what's being taught in high school, you know. So if you look up there, you'll see the various pictures, and I can tell you the last time I spoke at the high school, the teacher didn't like me very much at all after I spoke because I kind of screwed up the students, and that's okay. That's okay. If you look up there at all, you know, the Vietnam War is defined by a few photos. For example, if you look at our veterans coming home being called baby killers, it's kind of hard to call them baby killers when they're out in the rice fields protecting the same babies that supposedly they were hurting. So the My Lai events is constantly being brought up. It's being brought up, yeah, you know, it wasn't very good, but it's being brought up to paint a broad stroke against all Vietnam veterans and all the people involved in Vietnam, and I didn't like that. So I always use a photo of Marine soldiers carrying little babies to safety. And that's the honest truth. I actually have witnessed them, right? The other picture that actually turned the war around was so misled, you know, with the, you can see